So let's start with it. If I've got multiple sclerosis, is there a role for weed to play in my health and recovery?
If we're talking about it, you know, we're not gonna pull the bamboozle, the bait and switch. We're not gonna, we're not gonna lead you astray, set you astray, run amok. That ain't us,
We will
right?
not hoodwink you.
Yeah, we would not hoodwink you, bamboozle you. So MS, March is Multiple Sclerosis Awareness Month.
Right.
And the interesting thing about multiple sclerosis as it pertains to medical marijuana or CBD is that it is one of the most commonly accepted conditions that people can get medical marijuana licenses or access to state-run or state-regulated medical marijuana programs. So
Oh,
if you go
wow.
throughout all the different states, we talk about like every single state has its own kind of different law about cannabis access or medical marijuana. In the states that only have medical marijuana or have medical marijuana and adult use, you'll find a couple of conditions that are always there. For example, HIV/AIDS is a condition that will always qualify you for that. Epilepsy is another one. Let's say Parkinson's is another one, and multiple sclerosis is one of those conditions that will pretty much qualify you everywhere. So that's
Wow.
not by accident.
Okay.
So,
Well, what is multiple sclerosis? I know there are people who are dealing with this, navigating it now, but there are some people who
mhm.
are hearing that phrase for the very first time. When we say MS or multiple sclerosis, what exactly are we talking about?
Right. So the easiest way, I like to use analogies all the time. So if you think about like a power cord in your house and it's kind of like inside, there are electrical wires. If you
Mhm.
think of those electrical wires as being like your nerves that run through your body, right?
Mhm.
Those electrical wires are wrapped with something. There's insulation. So there's usually some sort of barrier or something to wrap around the wire. And that does two things. It allows for better communication, so there's no electricity like shooting out to the sides or going places where it's not supposed to be. So it's going in the direction that it goes, so we're not losing electricity, to the exterior. And it protects the wire as well from damage, so that it can continue to function its job. Now, in your household, in your life, there have been times when you've had wires that have lost that protective shield, right?
Right, right.
So and what happens, either there's an interruption in the electricity or whatever that wire was transmitting, right? Or, it makes the wire susceptible to other things, right? So you touch it, you're like, what was that? Like, yeah,
Right.
that's the wire, right? And so multiple sclerosis is similar to that the wiring, which is called the insulation, which is called myelin around your nerves, starts to get broken down and it starts to fray. That
Mm.
happens because of your body's immune system, like a few other conditions, these autoimmune disorders, mainly meaning your body is attacking itself,
Wow.
it's breaking down the insulation around your nerves, and as a result, you start to suffer the consequences.
Wow. Well, who's getting MS and what do those consequences look like? Like, what's the
Yeah.
practical impact of this breakdown in a person's life?
So I will tell you, this is the one time, because usually when we talk about this, it's like, who gets this stuff that we're talking about? We're always like, Black people, who gets well, like, who gets it the most? I'm like, well, sorry, Lurie, it's you.
Damn it. Damn
this,
it.
this week we caught a break. Right?
Mm.
This week, for our particular audience and demographic, we are not the primary demographic that gets this.
And when you say we, you're talking people of the Pan
Color.
African heritage, people of
Yeah,
color.
yes,
Okay.
right.
But which is
Brothers and
not to
sisters.
say that no people of color, because I actually have an aunt who is battling with MS. So it's
Yeah,
not to say that we don't, just
on
on
the right. So yeah.
on average, we are not the ones who are most
Mhm.
grappling with this issue. Am I
Yeah,
understanding that
right.
correctly?
That is absolutely so. Exactly. It's not
Okay.
to say that we are not, but we're just not the group that is at the top of the heat. Which
Well, it's nice to
again,
not be
when I was
winning for
recent,
once.
praise God. When I
Gee.
was researching it, I swear to God, I was like, usually you're like, hey, so who gets this stuff? And I'm like, man, Lurie, I hate to tell you, girl, you in the crosshairs. It's you.
It's not just because you're black, it's you black and you're a woman. We're often
Yeah,
like the ones who are suffering the most from these.
exactly.
Okay.
So in this one, it's Caucasian people
Mhm.
predominantly, and in that, it's Caucasian women. And
Okay.
so Caucasian women, slightly more than men, with like a 3-to-2 ratio, and it's a few other things. It's younger, so the diagnosis is usually earlier, around the age of 30, right? It's Caucasian women predominantly, and it's also people of higher socioeconomic status as
What?
well. Yeah. So now there's an interesting thing about that, right? There's an interesting point. So I was like, what is this, like a rich person's disease or something like that, right?
Don't tell me it's the new affluenza. We know that ain't it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Come see me. I'll write you a note, get you out of jail. Yeah. So there are some interesting things, right? So obviously, because it tends to skew more Caucasian, and just given the demographics and the way things are set up in the US,
Hmm.
that that's a population of people that are higher on the socioeconomic rung than everyone else, right? So
Got
there's
it.
right, so there is some of like, all right, let's just be like, let's just call it what it is. I was gonna say call a spade, but we
Hmm. That analogy, that one doesn't track as well this
that
time.
ain't it, that ain't it,
If you know,
right?
you know.
But there's other things, right? So it's outside of the fact that the US is set up, it's a socioeconomic system, it's set up to put certain people at the top of the heap, right?
Yeah.
There are some other things, there's genetics. So there's a potential that you kind of have these people within a smaller group, sometimes interacting with each other more so than you do everyone else. But
Hmm.
there's lifestyle choices. One of the things that they found is that people who are susceptible to multiple sclerosis get less sunlight.
Oh, wow.
So now, if you think about who would be out in the sun working all day, it would not be the rich people, right? They are
Hmm.
not out mowing the lawns, picking the fruit or doing all the labor that you would have someone who's spending hours in daylight, right?
Huh.
If you have a certain amount of cash, money, you're indoors, you're protected, you're AC, you're not out in them streets
Right.
working under the hard day sun.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
it's some interesting like sub things to that kind of start explaining why it skews the way it does.
Wow, that's interesting. So if you've gotten a diagnosis for MS, what are I know that there are a variety of treatments because if this is a
Yeah,
disease that's largely targeting white people, white women
yeah,
of a wealthier class, I'm inclined to believe there's some medicinals to support what's
yeah,
happening because that's a
yeah.
population that gets a lot of focus and care from our medical community.
Mm.
What are some of the traditional treatments that exist currently for people who are suffering with MS?
Yep. So again, we want to remind the audience, obviously those people who are listening and suffering will be like, no, I'm not white, but I got it. Yeah, we're not saying that you don't get it.
Right.
Right. We understand that. We're just saying that, it's curious that this is a disease that skews towards that population, which has access to a whole lot of things. So
Hmm.
speaking of that, right? We know that Western medicine likes to cook some things up in their kitchen for,
That's right.
for everything, right?
Right.
They got some, they're out in the lab
Who
with
needs
their,
nature when we've got chemicals? That's
yeah, exactly. So what they want to do, like I mentioned, is that it's your body attacking its nerve system, right?
yeah.
So your body can do that it attacks itself in a lot of ways. Like rheumatoid arthritis is another way that your body attacks itself. You've got like
Mm.
Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, all types of these autoimmune, diseases. Um, so these drug therapies are targeted at your immune system in different ways in order to get your immune system to chill out. So they will do things like, decrease the amount of immune cells, produce, right? So this is something that, yeah. So, for example, the steroid classes of medications that we take a lot for things, that's what it does. It decreases the amount of immune system. That's why long-term use of steroids puts you at risk for
Okay.
infections, fungal, people get thrush and those type of things, like fungal infections from long-term use of steroids. So they try
Wow.
to like trick your immune system or break down certain parts of your immune system. Again, using the analogy, it's like your immune system is your forces, your fighting forces, like your army, your military.
Right, right. So you
And
got to weaken the army so that the army doesn't work against you.
against its own people, its own citizens, right? And so it targets
Oh,
that.
that's like oh, there's a racism analogy in here somewhere. I was like,
Yeah,
wait, that's like stopping. Okay, I got to work on the analogy, but there's
right.
definitely an analogy here about your own nation's military working against you
Yeah, right.
because the
You're
blackness.
occupying yourself,
Okay.
right?
Wow.
And so these drugs are targeted at either decreasing the amount of, let's say, military people available or breaking down some of their equipment. Like, okay,
Mm,
well, you guys are going to show up and act crazy anyway. We're going to disable your GPS and tracking system. So you won't know where to go.
wow.
Right? So since you won't know where to go, you can't go to the place that you were aiming to get to. Right. And
Mm,
so all these drugs kind of work in some way to stop your immune system from doing what it believes is its job.
wow.
Obviously, obviously, whenever you do those things, and we always know it, whenever you kind of take things out, and this is just my personal belief, but it's backed up with a lot of the side effect profiles of these
Yeah.
medications, is that once you start playing around with things and isolating things and trying to target treatments that only affect a specific target or a specific region, we kind of throw things out of balance, right?
Right. But that's a
And,
very American approach to very Western
yeah,
approach to medicine.
yeah,
I just want to point out that one of our Nubians shared that the Wayne State Multiple Sclerosis Treatment and Neuroimmunology Clinical Research Center, they serve a population of more than 4,000 MS patients, and they've got the largest group of African Americans suffering with MS that they are treating in that space. So, Jonah, I just put that in the sheet. If you could please tweet that out, because this, again, we're not saying it does not impact Black people, just that statistically, white people tend to experience it at a higher rate. But
yeah.
this notion of the medicinals that are out there also being really good at making you weaker and more susceptible to
Yeah.
illness, that I'm struggling with that one, doc.
Yeah, so that is one of the things, right, where we always look at these medication options or these treatment options and say, okay, cool, I have this problem. You guys show up with a hammer, and now after you're done hammering all around here, yeah, it's a little better the original problem, but like, look at all the damage you've done around.
Right.
What am I going to do about this stuff? And so, people do become more susceptible to illness, disease, fatigue, rejection, injection site rejections, pain, like a whole
Wow.
bunch of stuff that you're just like, you know what, man, I don't know if this is better or worse than me just going it alone. And that
Mm,
is what I found in my particular experience in my office and the patients that I've treated, is that they've already been on therapies and treatments, and they come in and they're like, I don't know, doc. Like, first of all, it's not working that great, or
right.
second, it's not working that great, but I feel horrible.
Mm,
So, it's one thing to search a treatment and then get that treatment, and then that treatment gives you another challenge that you then have to deal with. Is it
right.
helping you out? Right. And so they
Wow.
usually come to me for that. Like, what are the other options, or what can I do to supplement in order to, like, keep this at a level that I can manage?
Yeah, yeah. And unfortunately, this is again, and I've said this before, Dr. Damas, this is one of the things that I do appreciate about you. Whenever we have these conversations about how cannabis can help support medical issues, it's never here's the weed, smoke it. It's gonna help all things go away. We always
Yeah.
have a discussion about what current treatments there are, the other holistic ways that these sorts of issues can be addressed, and then we get to the CBD 866-801-8255. So if I'm whether I'm dealing with the steroid based or the other sort of Western medicine traditional approaches to MS, are there additional holistic ways that I can manage this disease? Is it, and I guess we're calling it a disease, right? Or is it a syndrome, a symptom? What do we call
Condition.
this?
Yeah, you can call it, yeah,
Condition.
you can call it
Okay.
disease. I like to call them conditions. So kind of
Condition.
like,
I like that better.
Yeah, right. Gotta look classier. I'm a classy brother. You know what I'm saying? I like to keep it classy.
All right, all right.
In the office, in the clinic, on the
Yes,
radio
yes,
show.
yes.
We
On
like to
air,
keep it
especially on
classy.
air. We keep it classy.
On air.
So talk to us about some of these non cooked up in a lab with a whole bunch of
Yeah.
chemical approaches. And again, this is not folks for to say you should not be taking take your medicine. If the doctor
Yeah.
said take your medicine, take your medicine. But you should also know that there are other ways other additional things that can also help alleviate what you're going through outside of what you can purchase in a bottle from your doctor.
Correct. Absolutely. And so that's what, we've been talking about all this time, like the last year and a half, 2 years, is the fact that the way that I personally see medicine, and I think a lot of our listeners and, people from our culture, the African diaspora see medicine is that it's more of a whole person experience as
Right.
opposed to these kind of, hodgepodge of parts that you're just like interchanging a part or you're fixing a part
Right.
and then popping it back in like we're some sort of machines. And so the effect of chronic conditions is not only like the conditions themselves, but they affect you psychologically,
Mm.
they affect you spiritually. They kind of intervene in all ways in your life. For example, depression is a great, thing, is a great part of suffering with this, right? Because you have the pain that comes along with it, spasticity. You have this, this thing that's kind of like ruining your quality of life. So there's
Mm.
depression, anxiety comes along with it as well, sleeplessness, pain, loss of sexual function. So
Man.
there's all this other stuff that comes along with it. You have to learn how to, move your body at times because you're losing the insulation around the nerves. The conduction of the signals, like we mentioned earlier, sometimes does not happen well. So you get what's called spasticity, which basically means like your movements are not fluid or sharp. So we're
Wow.
looking at normal day-to-day things become harder to do because the electrical signals are like interrupted or going in bursts, or they're kind of
Mm.
frazzled. So you can't control your body and move your body as well as you want, right? So all these things, go ahead.
Is this a progressively degenerative disease? Like, is
Yeah.
this something that is ultimately fatal? What?
Yeah, it can be depending on where you're
Wow.
going because you can have developments of these things called plaques. And once you get the plaques on there, and so like the plaques are like somebody saw that the wire was frayed and they were like, oh, I got to fix that. Let me put some duct tape on it. And it's like, yeah, that's like
Mm.
that doesn't really fix it. Like that's duct tape, but I guess it's better than nothing. But the duct tape is not a great insulator, then it's not a permanent solution. And so now once you get these plaque
Wow.
developments, those sections right there are really compromised. And so
Mm.
if you get them in areas that affect your respiratory drive, that affect your ability to actually go through some autonomic nervous system functions, it can lead to death. So,
Wow.
yeah, so this is like a long-term thing.
Yeah.
And, there are things that you can do besides give people medications that can help them manage that, right? So physical therapy is really important, right? You got to go out and move. You got to learn how to move your body. Occupational therapy. Okay, now you have the difference between physical therapy and occupational therapy, for those who don't know, they taught me in residency because we used to be like, I call PTOT and the occupational therapist said, we don't do physical therapy. So the occupational therapists teach you how to go through, how to get about your activities of daily living, the
Mm.
things and the skills and the functions that you need to do to live your everyday life. How are you going to open cabinets and bottles and jars now if you have weakness and pain?
Wow.
Right? So how are you going to put your shoes on now, right? And so if you can, so they teach you how to do those things, which are very important. The
Right.
medication doesn't handle, it doesn't address those things. And then, building strength, muscle movement, proprioception. So things like yoga, Tai Chi,
Mm.
meditation allows centering of the mind, help you with some of the anxiety, depressive thoughts, right? And then therapy,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
all these chronic conditions have a psychological component. And so
Mm.
that should not be involved. All those things can help improve the person's quality of life, which is what we want altogether,
Right.
drugs or no drugs,
That's
cannabis or
right.
no cannabis.
That's right. improving the quality of life. So if we're approaching it from we've got our medicinals, we're doing our therapies, our physical, occupational, mind body therapies, we've got our cognitive behavioral therapies. I'm sure diet can also play a role in
Yep.
this as well, and then that brings us to if you have any dietary recommendations, please provide them. But that also then brings us to the one element we have not discussed, and Flower to the People requires that we discuss it, between diet and cannabis. How do those things also support people who are navigating the journey of living with multiple sclerosis?
When you were saying that, the song, remember the song, Give Me the Weed, Good God, that's what just popped up in my head. So, an interesting thing
There's
that
that
we
classy doc again. But give me the weed. That's the,
yeah,
hey,
give me the
give me,
weed,
listen.
good ganja weed. So, uh, one of the things that we talk about lightly from time to time that I think at some point we should talk about is nutrition and diet,
Yes.
because even Western medicine is finally catching up to the idea that the diet has a lot more influence and benefits to us than the stuff that they've been pushing out with us with the food pyramid and our
Mm,
recommended daily allowances. Like, that's a very rudimentary way of approaching nutrition science, right? It's like
right.
broad categories, eat your meats and grains and this and that and your servings, and then make sure you get these vitamins and minerals, and that's that. And so we're finding out things about the gut brain connection. We're finding the
Huh.
importance of gut flora. That's why you see all these people eating, supplementing.
Acidophilus and
Yeah,
probiotics.
exactly, with
Yeah, yeah.
probiotics. And we're also finding out, and this is, somebody's grandmama back in the day or whatever, probably told them, listen, that food is killing you, right? This stuff is killing. Let me give you some good food that will nourish you. And that's the absolute truth. So a
Mm,
lot of the foods that we're getting, especially if you live in real urban areas or, places that are not don't have ready access to fresh foods,
mm.
are highly inflammatory. So the foods, and we
Wow.
have this autoimmune immune condition like MS, which inflames the body, right? So your defense forces, your army is inflamed, and they're ready to take action on something, and then you feed them something that just gets them even more fired up, right? And
Yeah.
so what are they going to do? They're going to be even angrier and wilder. And so we're finding that a lot of foods cause an inflammatory response, a general whole body inflammatory response. And so being able to stay away from processed foods, eating foods that don't have a lot of inflammation. There are things that we know that trigger certain conditions, like an easy one is gout and alcohol, or gout
Mm.
and red meat. Like, don't eat that stuff. It's just gonna blow your big toe up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, and we're finding that a lot of these foods, not only a lot of our diets are really bad for us health wise, they exacerbate conditions, but there are things that we can add to our diets to help decrease the inflammation.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. So this nutrition matters. I'm actually learning and I should know better because my mom raised us to recognize the power of nutrition. But it's funny how you cross over into the 40s. And you're like, well,
Yeah.
damn, she was right. Like, this food is very inflammation inducing. Everything that your mother told you that you should have listened to, but you
Word.
didn't. I have to give up my cream cheese brownie addiction. But so in addition to diet, we've got
I'm
medicinals.
decadent.
Let's move on to the cannabis.
Ah,
How does cannabis help? Because obviously it does. If every state has at
yeah.
least has a framework that contemplates MS being one of the diseases or conditions for which a medical cannabis license or prescription card is available, obviously cannabis has a big role to play in alleviating the symptoms that are attenuating to a diagnosis like MS. But how and why?
So, two primary things that we discussed in the past, right? So, as an adjuvant to pain management, so quality of life thing. So we know THC is a very, very potent pain reliever. And so what that does is two ways. It affects the way that your brain processes and receives pain signals. So instead of saying like, that hurts, your brain is like, hmm, That's kind of weird. I don't know if it hurts, but it's kind of weird, right? So that decreases the pain and it decreases the intensity of the pain signals from the source. So they kind of
Wow.
slow down. So it allows you to tolerate pain a little bit better. Now, CBD and both THC, and we discussed this past, are both known as neuroprotectants. So what
Mm,
that means is that they actually protect the nerves themselves. And we discussed this, I think, in it may have been like the legalization episode we had when, we discussed the US government having a patent on
that's
cannabinoids
right.
as neuroprotected. So that's
Yeah.
like a well accepted and established scientific fact. That is like nobody's denying that,
In
but
the government.
application of that has been slow, right? So it's a well-known neuroprotectant. There have been studies. There's a
And this,
great
just to be clear, this don't mean you should be out smoking all day talking about I'm protecting my neurons, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's not what
Yeah.
we're
Yo,
suggesting
yo,
at
what's
all.
up? What's up, yo, man? I'm just chilling, man, protecting my neurons.
Protecting my
What's up with
neurological
you,
health,
son?
son.
Yeah. What's up with you, son? Yo, my neurons need some protecting too. Pass that L.
That is not the message for the day.
That is not the message. All right. So if you want to protect your neurons, make sure you form a cipher.
Don't use
All
blunt
right.
wraps. They're cancer causing.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, do not. Yeah, I am not a big fan of those blunt wraps. Those things always like I'm like, I don't know about that.
I think, just as a sidebar, allegedly, I think the blunt wrap has an addictive quality to it that exceeds whatever is in cannabis. And I'm talking THC cannabis. Because I
Yeah.
have known people who have not necessarily, they could have cannabis in the house all day, every day and not even think about it. But as soon as they know there's a blunt wrap about, it must be inhaled. And I've seen how, like, that, I think that, in addition to the fact that it's just not a good idea, they are carcinogenic and they have a whole bunch of chemicals in them. There is something to, I feel like it's kind of like nicotine, in a way that I've just, it brings out an addictiveness in people that I think is a little scary,
Yeah.
frankly.
I'm not a big fan of them. Then they got like the flavored ones now. God knows what they're doing. What God knows what they're doing, processing those leaves. Like, all that stuff, came from people like the old splitting Dutches and White Owls, and it's like, okay, we're gonna save you that step and we're gonna give you this,
Right.
a version of that. And we're gonna add I'm not a big fan.
Yeah. And I'm like, Dutch masters. I mean, do we really have to look at the etymology of the phrase Dutch master? I just, at some
Exactly.
point, we
Yeah.
should unpack that. The
Yeah,
blackness in
exactly.
me finds it abhorrent.
Yeah,
It's a little offensive. A little offensive.
exactly.
Dutch
And like
master.
I said to you, right? Like we don't even like a lot of us don't realize that, people drank it as teas. Like
Right.
smoking wasn't like historically the thing that you would do with it. It
Right.
was to smoke
Right.
it and then render not to smoke it, to boil it, cook it, and then render the cannabis oils out of the plant. And then you can drink that and then you
Right.
can make other things from that. You can mash it and make your salves and all that stuff. You can't do all that stuff if you light it on fire.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Exactly. And
right.
my first understanding of cannabis as a medicinal when I was younger, I had a family member who had really bad asthma, and their parent would boil them marijuana tea, and that was really helpful to. I didn't know the science behind it then, but it would keep them out the hospital, out the emergency room where they often ended up, just
Yeah.
because of really bad experiences with asthma.
Yeah.
So we know that technically you can inhale it if that is
Mhm.
your mode of
Yeah,
choice. No
that's true.
shade, we get it, but there are other ways that you can also consume cannabis if you're battling with MS. And I
Right.
know you have the edibles, the capsules, you've got the creams.
Mhm.
How can people incorporate those cannabis in that form? And are you, when you're talking about cannabis from MS, are you talking about the THC kind of cannabis or the CBD kind of cannabis or both?
So my patients, what I've found, and this is what they've told me, I'm not an MS sufferer myself, but the patients that I have said that they prefer actually the CBD more than the THC. And if they're mixing the THC, they want something that has higher, or they're going to have more CBD in the product than THC. The reason being is the all day use. And so the condition doesn't kind of like, oh, this morning, it was acting up, but now it's better. It's a chronic thing. And so
Mm,
when you're having exacerbations, flare ups, or this is an all day thing.
yeah.
And sometimes the cannabis, because it goes to your head, like they'd like to say, like they'll say, I don't want something that goes to my head. And so the
Right.
CBD allows you to get that anti-inflammatory, the neuroprotectant, some of the pain reliever without you losing your focus. So you can still have a good life, which is what we want you, right? We
Right.
want you to, that's what you want, right? You want to
Yeah.
have a good life. You want to be able to go to work and you don't want to be all high and disoriented all day.
Yeah.
So they like the CBD side of things and the THC with the CBD because it's an all day kind of thing. But there are times because, THC is a more potent pain reliever than CBD. There are times where the CBD, to refer something is not big enough of a hammer, right?
Mm,
And so you do need the THC at night to just like put you out. I don't want to feel anything. I'm
got
done with
it.
this. And so
Got it.
you'll find a combination of the two of them. You can have the tinctures, the oils. Again, you could smoke, but smoking doesn't really last that long. So if you have a chronic condition, smoking, only treats you for an hour or two max.
Mm,
Then you have to start smoking again, right? So you have the chronic conditions, you'll be smoking all day. It's better to eat, drink. And then you have, like we mentioned, topical things that you can rub on areas of pain. So
mm.
like the salves or the roll-ons and those type of things. And if you put the whole thing together from the nutrition, the behavioral therapy, the meditation, the yoga, physical therapy, and the cannabis, then you have enough tools that you can
Right.
fight back, right? And then you could
Right.
probably get some semblance of control in your life, as opposed to going somewhere where they're like, here's a prescription, good luck. I'll
Right.
see you. I'll see you and see. Tell me how it turns out for you. I'll be here.
You and
Right.
your immune system have fun now, okay?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Dr. Damas, I'm seeing in the Nubia chat, there's a lot of commentary here. Some folks are saying they're cautioning the idea that it's not as prevalent in Black people because they said, one person said, Black people get misdiagnosed for years because MS is a diagnosis of elimination. And a lot of doctors don't think of MS because it is thought of as a white woman's disease. Somebody else said, I never understood smoking a blunt that someone else had to lick and split all, and spit all over the room. Also factual, although I've heard
Yeah.
some people say that the fire of the
The
flame
fire,
will
yeah.
burn up any of the germs from the spittle of the person who put it together. I don't know. Do with that what you will. And another person is mentioning that this is one of the reasons the need for reducing inflammation with food products is one of the reasons why they take a teaspoon of turmeric regularly throughout the week. I incorporate a lot of turmeric in my
Mhm.
cooking and in my diet as well for very similar reasons. So you've given us a real sort of a full circle approach. We've got the medicinals. We know that happens, but because of the side effects, I really appreciate that we have all of these other things to consider. And for people who need a further discussion with you, Dr. Damas, I have it on good authority that your team is pretty damn good at answering questions when folks call your office and where they reach out via the website. And I know this because people will then come back and tell me that Dr. Damas, whoever's answering that phone, they are so nice and they just help me understand everything. So what's the best way for people to connect with you, particularly those who have more in-depth questions, perhaps they don't want to share on air and want to have more of a personal conversation with folks in your office? What's the best way for them to reach you? Because it ain't going anywhere for
Right.
a number of reasons. So this is something we definitely want to make sure people have the ability to address in meaningful ways.
So you guys always give us a shout, 1-833-362-3262, 833-362-3262. Also hit us up at the website, drdamas.com, drdamas.com, or you can spell it out like drdamas.com. You buy anything from the site, make sure you put in a special code that will unlock all of God's glory for you, which is Lurie, Lurie. And I will want to say this real quick. I got to give y'all a shout out. Lurie, I got to give you a shout out, and I got to give your listeners a shout out, because let me tell you,
We
the
got 30 seconds to do
nicest
it, so we here
people,
for it.
oh my, look, the nicest people that call. We've had people come by and visit, and like
Aw.
just to swear to God, we've had people travel from across the country to come visit us from like Nevada. We had people come
Wow.
from Oregon. But when I tell you about like nice people, like
Mm,
the sweetest, they'll call up, be like, so we're giving back what we get,
I
right?
know
So
that.
no one calls us and is like mean and angry to us. Everyone's nice as you. You have to be nice. You have no choice. So I appreciate you guys, and you help us out a lot because we learn a lot from the people that call us in, call in,
Yeah.
and come and see us. It's a blessing for real.